So now we want to shift gears and look ahead into the forecast part of our conference. A fresh decade means the chance for fresh perspective, and our forecast presentations give us an opportunity and an important sense of what is coming down the road. And from all of the presenters, you're going to hear a lot about what went on in 2019, but also we're going to, hold their feet to the fire a little bit and ask them to stick their neck out and make some predictions about what they anticipate in each of their different sectors for 2020. And if you don't feel that they've done enough on that, please ask questions and hold them to that. For all of our presenters today, we have their Twitter handles on the screen as well as their bios in your conference materials. New for this year, we've added a sector analysis on York County, an encouraging area of growth in our state. And one other thing I want to mention, typically at our forecast conference, we present the MEREDA index. And you may have noticed from looking at the materials that the MEREDA index is not in here. And that's by design, because what we've had to do in the past to present the MEREDA index, which is our sort of measure of real estate performance in the state, to present it at the forecast conference, we've really had to look at, 3 quarters of data and to present a sort of incomplete report, and then we do it again in the spring when we have that complete data. This year we've decided that we're going to do it once a year. It's going to be at our spring conference. We'll be unveiling the MEREDA index then, so please look forward to that in May for our spring conference. So next, we're going to be joined by Justin LaMontagne at NAI, the Dunham Group. He's sharing with us his Southern Maine industrial forecast.
Thanks, Gary. Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is exciting. As I get settled here, I want to start by thanking my marketing team and at the Dunham Group, Marina Termel, helped us put these slides together. We once again produced the industrial market survey. That's available downstairs. It's also available online at our website. I also want to thank my wife and dog, who have listened to this speech about 9 times. And truth is, you all have heard this at least 2 or 3 times. The gist of my presentation today is that it's a little familiar, and I'll show you. Here's a brief outline as to what we're going to talk about today. I'll start with the industrial market survey. Those are the stats, the data. I'll get into a little bit about what happened in 2009, some larger deals, some trends, and some anecdotes that we saw. And then, of course, I'll finish with the forecast and make some predictions. I'll start with the numbers, though. These are the results of the industrial market survey. For those of you that don't know, I track, and I have been tracking, Greater Portland industrial market, 7 towns and cities for about 9 years. These are today's results. We've got about an inventory of 19 million square feet, so we passed that milestone, which is pretty cool. I'd say hopefully we're trending towards 20, as you'll soon see, because our vacancy rate is still below 2%. And it's safe to say that no sector that you're going to hear about today has had such a sustained space crunch as we've had in the industrial market. And that's kind of what this chart reflects. This chart shows 2 points, data points. Actually, the top line is in regards to cap rates. Those are investment deals. And you can see they steadily are declining, which means prices are going up, returns are going down. I don't suspect that to change. Cap rates are a little hard to get in terms of the data, so these are mostly pulled from our own internal deals and some that I've gotten from others. But generally, I think it's safe to say a quality industrial building is going to sell for between a 7 and 8% cap rate. The lower green line, those are lease rates. And you can see the dramatic, vacancy rates. You can see the dramatic drop over the last decade or so. You recall last year that spike that we had, that was really in regards to one large building, 7 Rand Road, but that building has been filled. So we're back down to that 2% number. And really, but for that one property, that's where we've been for about 4 years now. Accordingly, as you imagine, lease rates continue to rise. I will admit a little bit of a flaw in this data in that we just don't have a lot of asking prices. So I'm trying my best and I'm using my gut on some of these things, and it's probably not dramatic enough because I'm calling the average lease rate, and this is based on real data, about $7 a square foot. But there are plenty of examples of much higher lease deals going, particularly for really quality properties in good locations or specialty buildings like food production or anything cannabis-friendly, for example. We'll get there. Vacancy rates, you can see here that this is not just a Portland thing. This is really across all of southern Maine. Gorham is now completely sold out. There is not a single square foot of industrial space in the town of Gorham. Scarborough, South Portland, Westbrook are all very close. I'm going to talk a bit more about sales later in my presentation, but this chart reflects pricing, the trajectory you can see just year over year, increasing. Like my leasing chart, maybe not dramatic enough. We're calling the average sale price at around $70 a square foot now. I can tell you there are plenty of examples of much higher prices on a per square foot basis, depending on the deal. They're very deal specific, and I'm going to get into some of those later today. But the point is, about 10 years ago, we were struggling to get $40 a foot, so it's truly doubled. So let's talk a little bit about 2019, and as I said, I admit that this all sounds rather familiar. I've been basically complaining about lack of inventory for 3 or 4 years now, and the simple supply and demand principles suggest that this is clearly a landlords and sellers market. Higher impact uses like craft brewing and cannabis and food production and fitness facilities, for example, have really never had it harder, and even lower impact traditional industrial businesses also are struggling to find space. Landlords can be very selective in what they allow to go in their building. 2019 also continued, I guess just inventory. When there is a lack of inventory, when it came online, demand was frothy, as you'd imagine. So that led to multiple offers, early to market deals, some off market deals, and a lot of frustrated end users, businesses that just are losing out on these opportunities. And 2019 also continued, I think, one of the more interesting phenomenons, and that is where investors are looking for cash flowing buildings or tenants, and sometimes buying on spec, buying a building empty, and they're paying more than end users. And what is unusual is for years, really in any sector, the adage was that a business that could own and occupy a building is more likely and more willing to pay a premium. And the numbers are showing today that that's just not the case. And of course, that's frustrating businesses and driving up prices even further. And I think Heather kind of touched on this, the previous presenter. This issue is becoming an economic and growth problem. I think I said this a couple of years ago when she talks about infrastructure. The answer to her question is we do not have enough infrastructure. We do not have enough commercial space for these companies to do whatever it is they do and grow and add jobs. So you'd think that would lead to new construction, and it has. There's some good news to report there. As I mentioned, lease prices are getting much closer to supporting consistent new construction. I've got a slide that shows a number of new projects. But at the rate and the trajectory that our lease prices have increased, so has construction costs. So the gap is still very real. It's kind of gone like that. I don't have a cool chart that shows that, but you get the idea. Speculative development, financing can still be challenging. Banks are not totally comfortable with lending on a property without a long-term secured lease. Timing and lack of vision for a lot of our users still is an issue. Most of our tenants locally are thinking 3 to 4 or 5 months out. New construction can take as much as 8 or 12 months, so you just need to have a clearer path. And I guess just generally speaking, seeing a piece of dirt, or in some cases a forest, and imagining a building there and planning it and paying for it all, it can be intimidating and challenging. But the truth is, in some cases, there is no choice. So what do? We build. And where are we going to build? I think the best example is, and where they're going to do a lot of buildings, in Scarborough. The Innovation District, I applaud these developers for what they're up to there. They've made it as streamlined, as easy as it can be. It's still, a bit harder than buying an existing building, of course. They've dedicated a portion of the entire campus specific to light industrial, which is outstanding. The zoning is appropriate. I talked to John Rizzo from the Bolus Company, who's marketing these sites. They've got 3 already sold and under contract. 9 more are 3 are sold and under construction. 9 more are under contract. Interestingly, he's got investors buying buildings there too. So obviously they're making the financing work, and they're confident that they can get the tenants in and pay the lease rates to support those costs. I walked this site 2 months ago maybe with my team. It is impressive. It's 100 acres of flat, cleared industrial land, so go check it out. Additionally, specific to 2019, here's a few projects that did go up. You can see each of these were led by either anchor tenants or end users who were building them. There were none of these were built on spec. There are some recognizable names. Mass Landing Brewing, Reedy Seafood built a huge new processing facility in Saco. Foley's Fitness built a gym. Harvey Performance is underway building an 80,000 square foot property in Gorham. Anyways, all of this adds up to about 300,000 square feet, which is great. It's got us over that 19 million square foot number, but they're all full, and the properties that these businesses either moved out of or expanded from are also full. So the net result is really not much. It didn't affect our vacancy very much. So as tight as things are, how do we get deals done? And the truth is, there really weren't very many deals. I can't speak for the other firms, but I looked internally at the Dunham Group's number of deals year over year, and after many, many years of consistently having the same number of transactions, our number of transactions, sales and leases, actually dropped 49% in 2019. However, the value of those smaller number of deals increased 15%. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's sustainable, but it's clearly a reflection of what this market looks like. We really saw in 2019 the impact and influence of 1031 tax-deferred exchange money, whereby somebody sells a property, doesn't want to pay the capital gains, and tries to find something to roll into, effectively cash winning these deals. That further inhibited businesses who were competing against those investors looking for conventional financing or SBA financing. And this trend nationally was actually happening as well. For the first time ever, average sales prices per square foot to investors topped average per square foot prices to owner users. That is completely against historical norms. Not just in Maine, but all over the country this is happening. Aside from investment demand, we are still mostly driven by small to medium-sized companies. That's pretty typical. Demand seems very healthy. These are companies that are local, growing organically, riding this good economy. I'll tell you, they're all kind of looking for the same thing, this hypothetical 3,000 to 5,000 square foot unit with a loading dock, nice little office space, easy access to 95. Look at the broker at your table and ask them if that unit exists in this market. It exists, but it's full, and that is no joke. So really, who won the deals? It's those companies that were most engaged with the market. You really had to be aggressive. You need to be working with a broker or on your own and just studying the listing databases, looking for lease signs, really having the ability to be flexible and to jump at any opportunity. It is a landlord's market, I'll say it again. So if you are a tenant or a business looking for space and you have that shot, don't over-negotiate. Get the space. Oh, and by the way, marijuana, cannabis has been quiet the last couple of years, just given the lack of legislative direction and rules. They finally figured it out. So they're going to be kind of back in this market, and I'm going to get more into that in my forecast. Here are some of the largest deals of the year. I'll start with 15 Saunders Way. This was a speculative building. This was a 60,000 square foot building built by J.B. Brown, filled originally half by Maine Beer Company. They filled the final 30,000 square feet this year. Aero Heating and Ventilation. Greg Hastings and Drew Sigfridson did that deal. Greg Bolus and I filled 6 Lincoln Avenue in Scarborough, and another deal at 25 Washington Avenue, 20,000 feet by New England Tech Air. Greg Hastings did that deal. Those two buildings effectively filled that entire park. There's a couple spatterings of smaller spaces, but Scarborough, very healthy. The largest deal, at least in terms of square footage, was a sublease. This was a deal done by Greg Bolus and John Rizzo. Imeskip continues to kind of become more entrenched in Portland, which is great. They rented 100,000 square feet from Office Max in Portland. Some of the largest sales of the year, you're going to notice most of these are investment deals. This one was the largest I could find, 48 Spiller Drive and 600 County Road. This was a investment package. Sigco fully leased these buildings, and it was sold at about a 7.5% cap rate, $11.5 million total. Greg Hastings and Steve Bauman did that deal. Greg and I sold 79 Sanford Drive in Gorham. This was the Harvey Performance building that they're moving out of to build that new facility in Gorham, the 80,000 square foot property. Kind of a neat idea and concept here. We came up with the idea of doing a short-term leaseback so that when they're transitioning from this property to the new facility, they'd have one less thing to deal with, selling their property. So we did a 2-year lease, and it was sold at about a 8% cap rate. And now what that means is we've got a 2-year runway to find a replacement tenant. With a traditional building, that probably would have been riskier. This is a very specialized, special quality building. A lot of nice infrastructure. I'm quite confident we're going to be able to find a tenant, and we've already got a number of looking at it. T.C. Haffenraffer, Tom Moulton, and Greg Hastings did a couple more deals. Tom Dunham as well in South Portland, One Runway and 53 Wallace Avenue. A lot happening with both of these buildings, both relatively early and or off-market deals. 53 Wallace actually sold twice in the last 2 years. The long story short is that it's all positive. They're full and or under contract to be full, so no vacancies there. The only owner-user sale that I could find, this is a deal that I did at 47 Spring Hill Road in Saco. Maine Lobster Now purchased this building at $85 a square foot. That set a record for that park, but when compared to what he was looking at in new construction, $150 a square foot, it was a good deal, and that is a real-life example of that gap that still exists. One Lincoln Street in South Portland sold for over $3 million. Tom Moulton in my office did that deal. 378 for Sumscott, another deal by Greg Hastings. Rather quiet, early to market deals, both of them. And the last sale I'll present is 142 for Sumscott Street. This was also off market. It was put on the market for lease. And Craig Church and his client were approached unsolicited by someone to buy it, and at $125 per square foot, that is a record number, and certainly a high water mark for Sumscott Street. It's one of those deals you probably couldn't say no to. Michael Flaherty represented the buyer. Nationally, somewhat similar story, but continued added inventory. E-commerce is certainly leading the way. Distribution centers are keeping the national vacancy rate closer to 7 or 8%, so a little bit more flexibility, e-commerce. Investment real estate is very hot nationally. Really everywhere, they're realizing that industrial real estate, probably along with housing, is the safest, longest-term asset, and I really don't expect that to change in 2020, which is a nice segue to my forecast. Here are some large vacancies. These, of course, have an impact. I'll be somewhat brief here. I'll mention a couple. One Runway Road, I already said, is under contract. 5 Bradley Drive, this is the former Olympia Sports distribution building. Jim Harnden is selling that. It is under contract, interestingly, to investors who are going to look for tenants. So that will add certainly some vacancy or some inventory to our market, which is great. Somewhat similar story with 203 Reed Street. This is where Brockway Smith is on Reed Street in Portland. Brockway Smith will be relocating to 7 Rand Road, which is that big monster building that was impacting my data last year. So they're going to slide over there, 250,000 feet, but leave 160,000 feet, also vacant, looking for tenants. And that building subdivides well, tall ceilings. I think we'll be successful finding replacement tenants. Silas Hatch in my office is working on that. Last one, real quick, is 20 Morin Street in Biddeford. That's the one in the lower middle. Turnkey food processing facility. Unfortunately, Grocers Express in Biddeford is closing their factory, so they're going to leave behind a truly one-of-a-kind facility. And I'll be working on that one. Make some predictions here. Cannabis. Cannabis is back. Retail and recreational kind of have their direction now. So what's interesting, though, is we're really seeing most demand in the 20 to 30,000 foot range. So these canopies have gotten much larger, which I think is going to impact the smaller guys. The guys that we put in these spaces 5-6 years ago, which were 2,000 or 3,000 feet, stands to reason they may struggle, which could loosen up that inventory. As I mentioned, that's exactly what a lot of traditional tenants are looking for. I do think vacancies rates will increase. I mentioned that the cannabis impact, the larger spaces that are coming online, those vacancies that I mentioned, and I think new construction as well. I have said this for like 5 years in a row, though, so I haven't been right yet, but maybe this is my year. Secondary markets. I didn't get a chance to talk about, and I won't talk about Lewiston, Auburn, or Augusta, or the Mid-Coast. I think we're going to hear more about that later today. I can say that all those markets seem to be doing well. I got some pretty good size sales presented to me from Kevin Fletcher in Auburn and Dennis Wheelock and a couple others. So sounds like prices are increasing there, vacancies are down, and demand seems pretty steady. I think the Downs folks are onto something. This idea of building turnkey land or offering turnkey land for people is going to work. And my sense is that we're a copycat business, and some municipality or developer will take advantage. Certainly, there's not another 400-acre site next to the Maine Mall, but on a smaller scale, I think it stands to reason. I've actually heard real-life examples of a couple towns looking into what it'll mean to create a new industrial park. And what's happening in a lot of urban centers, we've seen it here in Portland certainly, is converting older industrial stock into hipper, cooler retail office space. Great for the community, great for the consumer, certainly the highest and best use for those buildings. But as an industrial broker, a little bit of me cringes every time we lose that critical inventory. But I don't think it's going to stop or change. And I think I'll finish with just some general questions. Who should build? There was one example in my construction chart that showed a property in Millbrook in Saco. It's a 19,000 square foot building. George Kerr and Ashley Kerr are building it, and she's going to occupy about 2/3 of that property with her business. They specifically and purposely left the balance empty to rent it out, which I think is a great model. Banks are comfortable with that. It really makes the numbers work. And importantly, you can also do SBA financing for something like that, because as long as you're occupying over half the building, you're good. So I like that model. Craft brewing, very impactful in our industry the last few years. I'm running low. Okay, I'm getting the hook. I'll just say quickly, the trend there is that some of these established brands are opening secondary and sometimes third spaces, which is really interesting. Next hot location, I'm really excited about Presumscott Street. And I will also say Will Armitage is coming up next. Southern York County has a lot of opportunity. Kennebunk, Wells, York, from an industrial standpoint, I really think that things are going to happen there. Advice for tenants, I'll be quick. Be aggressive, talk to your brokers, do what you got to do to get the space. And I've never finished this presentation without a prediction for the Patriots game. So I don't know how to finish, but I will say that this guy is coming back in 2020.
Thanks, Justin. We're running a little behind schedule, and Justin did such a good job of kind of making his predictions that we didn't really have time for questions, but that was a really great presentation. Next up is Will Armitage with the York County Market Forecast. Will?
Great, and I have 10 minutes to do a 20-minute presentation. So let me see if I can abbreviate my remarks here in our presentation. First, I should say thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present York County's market overview. This is the first time we've had a chance to give you this kind of overview of what's going on and what's happening in York County, so we're very excited about that. Some of you are probably looking around the table saying, I thought you worked for Biddeford Saco. I still do. About 10 years ago, our organization started to expand our product offerings and services throughout York County. And in doing so, we decided to rebrand ourselves to the Southern Maine Finance Agency, which is a name that more accurately describes who we are and what we do. The other thing that we've done recently has been to create a partnership with Pine Tree State Certified Development Corporation. And it's a 504 lender, and so we're going to continue to be able to provide 504 loans throughout the state of Maine. And in doing so, we've hired Steve Lovejoy, who's here in the office, in the room. So if anybody has questions about 504 financing, please seek out Steve. This is a group presentation. I really collected a lot of this information with the help of the cities of Biddeford, Saco, Sanford, the towns of Kennebunk and Kittery, as well as Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission and our own agency. So moving forward, I'm going to quickly give you an update on the economy, and we think it's important to give you an update on what the economics and the economy looks like in York County, because it has a direct impact on what we're going to talk about for the real estate market. All the data I've got has come from the Department of Labor, and some of the real estate numbers have come from Justin's numbers as well as the communities. So York County, this is kind of what the York County looks like from an employment perspective. It's really the same top 5 employment and labor areas that the rest of the state has, with one difference. Manufacturing is the number 2 employment sector in York County versus number 5 in the state. That's about 20% of our workforce. This number also includes, or is inclusive, of the federal employees. And the reason why I note that is because Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is a significant economic driver and engine for York County. Approximately, I'm going to say 25% of the state's manufacturing employment is in York County. This just gives you a quick view of the last 5 years, what the numbers look like. We all go through this with the leisure and hospitality industries and the swings that we get. The big drivers on the employment side for the last 5 years has been leisure and hospitality and manufacturing. That's added about 8,000 jobs over the last 5 years. This is the York County, just some numbers on business establishments. You can see we've had continued growth over the last 10 years. Even after the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, we've still had some pretty good growth, about 800 businesses. This gives you a quick breakdown of the business establishments in relation to those super sectors that the Maine Department of Labor qualifies. And the item of note here is that our second, got to flip the page and keep up with my notes here. Our third largest business sector in terms of the number of businesses is the leisure and hospitality. And versus the state, in comparison to the state, it's number 6. So you see there's a lot of dependence on that leisure and hospitality. Next slide here gives you just kind of a brief look at what the employment and the labor force and the population looks like. You can see we've had pretty steady growth in the population. Hopefully that's going to continue, but as we've heard all this morning, that's going to be a significant driver of what's going on. The labor force actually has remained pretty stable. And the other thing I would call note to you here is that there's a variance here between the labor force and the number of employees in the workforce that's down in York County, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've got a lot of commuters in York County, so there's a lot of people that commute either to Portland for work from York County or commute south to Portsmouth and Boston from this area, and that's driven some of the residential numbers. And then finally, all of this is obviously driving down our unemployment rate. So what does all this mean for our industrial and retail sectors? York County has about 8 million square feet of industrial space. That's about 4.2 million square feet that we can add on to Justin's number and put us up over 20 million square feet. The largest sectors are primarily in, the largest groupings are primarily in our service sectors. You can see it's Biddeford, Saco, and Sanford that are the largest sectors or largest communities. But I want to note that this number we feel is low because it does not capture a lot of the industrial space that's in some of these outlying rural communities, communities like Elliott, Hiram, and Waterboro. And there's a lot of supply-related companies that are in those kind of outlier communities to the shipyard and to other major employers. The other thing that I would, retail, wrong way. Retail and office inventory. Here we've got about almost 3.6 million in inventory, have an average lease rate of about $12 a square foot. Again, this is dominated by Biddeford, Sanford, and Kittery, and is primarily driven by the large retail outlets and shopping centers that exist. So it's going to be interesting to see, well, we'll talk about that on the next slide. The industrial vacancies. So Justin talked about and included some of our numbers, Biddeford and Saco in his numbers, but here's kind of what the numbers look like from what we have for data. Now, I don't have comparisons because this is the first time we've done this. I would note that I put NA on the Berwicks, Kennebunk, Kittery, and Wells. because we're not exactly sure how much it is, but those numbers are based, as an example with the Berwicks, on two major companies. So in the Berwicks, you've got Pratt & Whitney and Hussey Seating, and both of those are fully occupied. So we think those numbers are zero, but I didn't have data on it, so I didn't want to say zero. Here's your retail and office vacancy numbers. Again, we've got some fluctuation in what those look like, average rate of 8%. And we will work on collecting more accurate data for next year's presentation. We did not have numbers on Kittery, but it's going to be an area for us to watch because as you see, our feeling is over the next couple of years, the retail industry is struggling or is competing with itself, especially the larger chains, for the in-store sales versus those internet sales. So what is that going to do to some of the places that are located in these strip malls? However, on the flip side to that is, you look at some of the downtowns and we've got a lot of niche businesses that are locating in there, so the locally owned businesses are doing a lot better. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens with that. So recent activity. I've got a slide here that gives you a table of some of the recent activity that's occurred. You can see a lot of it is in that retail and office locations. And then specifically, some of the highlights include prime tanning down in Berwick. So this was a brownfield site that the community did a lot of work with to clean up. It's an 11-acre parcel in the heart of downtown Berwick. Property was recently purchased by Great Falls Construction, and they plan for a mixed-use development to enhance the sense of place in the village. To date, they've held 2 listening sessions, and as they finalize their plans, they're going to hold several more listening sessions. The Biddeford Mill Complex. You've probably heard a lot about this over the last few years. There are an estimated 200 businesses, including manufacturing, restaurants, breweries, distilleries, health services, and there's approximately 500 housing units currently. So Draft Room LLC is just purchased last summer, buildings 3 and 4 on that slide, and it's the top rendering. That is about 92,000 square feet. They're planning on 14,000 square feet of commercial development, over 70 apartments, and a continuation of the Riverwalk. And I can't really show it, but on the rendering, you can see the building that's next to the river. It's going to run up along that on the riverside. The rendering below that is Lincoln Mill. There's been talk about that over the last couple of years. We're starting to get some movement on it. That's approximately 240,000 square feet. They're going to have about 20,000 square feet of commercial space, over 140 units, and the plans call for a 30-unit extended stay hotel to be constructed. Down in Kittery, you've got the Seacoast Residences and Homestead. Seacoast Residence is the picture on the right, on the left side. You can see the little kind of white circle that shows where it is between Danette Road and I-95. That's about a 300-unit market rate multifamily project that's going to be constructed. And the hope is that that will provide access to additional vacant land. And then Homestead, again, was an environmentally contaminated site on Route 1 South. That was a tear down, and the plan was to have, or is, for a 40-unit apartment complex in the back, and then on the front is going to be a Marriott town place and suites, 120 rooms, and that's the rendering on the bottom right-hand side of that slide. Justin talked a little bit about some of the Saco stuff. They had $41 million in commercial building investment that occurred over the last year. Projects include the Ready Seafood, which is pictured there, $10.5 million project, 52,000 square feet, state-of-the-art lobster processing facility. It's located on 40 acres, and there are hopes that there's additional buildings or tenants that will be able to locate on that space. Hancock Lumber is constructing a $5 million facility on 11 acres. And then there was, I think he alluded to Ashley Lauren Designs, Convenient MD, Precision Manufacturing, and Dermalogic are all some of the other projects that occurred. Sanford, most of Sanford's infrastructure was municipally driven, and investments were municipally driven in the last year. They have a $50 million Sanford Airport solar project, which is being built, owned, and operated by NextEra Energy Resources. It's going to be a utility-scale facility with 150,000 solar panels that is expected to generate 50 megawatts. When completed, that's expected to be the largest solar array on an airport in the United States. Sanford Net Fiber is a $2.5 million investment in 45 miles of fiber optic network and assets and equipment owned by the city of Sanford. Sanford was outside the dark fiber 3 rings, and Sanford has invested in doing this to provide this infrastructure for its businesses and its residents. The network is operated by GWI, and they're expecting to have speeds of up to 100 gigabytes. And then lastly, you can see the photos of the Sanford Regional High School and Technology Center that was recently completed. That's a $110 million state-of-the-art facility and includes an 850-seat performing arts center. So what do we have for forecasts? Well, we're projecting a lot of the same. With available acreage, vacant mill space, new rental housing units, and continued economic growth, we expect more of the same. York County has over 1,900 acres of industrial undeveloped land that is zoned and available for commercial development. With sites like this one in Kennebunk, there's ample room for new projects to be constructed. Mill space. York County has over 800,000 square feet of vacant mill space that's available for occupancy and development for commercial, industrial, or residential uses. This facility pictured here is the Stenton Trust Building in Sanford, which is currently in the Brownfields program being cleaned up and should be coming available online in the next year. York County has over 800 housing units coming online in the next year, including Saxon Apartments at Barrow Road in Biddeford, which is a 10-acre site adjacent to the Robert Dodge Business Park, which will have 250 units. Other new projects include York County Courthouse, which is a 115,000 square feet judicial center that's being constructed at 511 Elm Street in Biddeford. And then the other one that's going to be of interest is the Pearl Street Riverfront District in Biddeford. This is the former Maine Energy site. 6.5 acre site in the heart of Biddeford's downtown. It's going to be redeveloped with a 650 space parking garage, 250,000 square feet of mixed use space, and a continued extension of that river walk I alluded to earlier, along Building 3 up into the park area. All total, Biddeford's mill projects within the Riverfront District represent $100 million in public and private investment that's happened in the city of Biddeford. So challenges. Like all of us, we're running into a lot of the same issues. Low vacancy rates coupled with high construction costs could easily put the brakes on projects and slow development. We've already experienced a lot of slowdowns because of cost overruns. Tight labor market could discourage business expansions and relocations, but hopefully the new housing units coming online will address that and alleviate that concern. However, absent any unanticipated shocks to the economy, we foresee continued economic growth and expansion in York County. I did want to put up this slide that has the municipal contact information for everybody, the major centers that worked with me on pulling this information together. So if anybody has specific questions related to some of the municipalities, you can certainly reach out and contact them. And then finally, I've got my information and SMPDC and InvestCom's contact information, all of whom were instrumental in helping me pull this information together for your education and enjoyment this morning. So I think I cut myself down pretty quick. Gary? All right. Thank you.
So thank you, Will. Really exciting things going on in York County, and it's great to have that as part of our forecast analysis for the first time this year. I do want to mention one thing. You know, we're looking at the all of the mill development in and around Biddeford. MEREDA has been a really strong proponent working with the state to get the state historic tax credit put in place and to extend it. And we're working on that right now. And I think it's fair to say without our state historic tax credit, those mills in Biddeford would not have been, redeveloped and having, all of that investment that Will talked about.